Hello, TPR Nation. This is Amber Keem from the Perfect RIA. Thank you for joining me on today's Follow-Up Friday, where I'll be covering the highlights and action items from this week's episodes. Monday's episode was a bit of a true confession for Micah, as he shared that he had to make some exceptions to some very common rules that he and Matt are always telling advisors that they need to change in order to have a successful practice. So, this episode is all about exceptions and those times when it really comes down to you not having a process or there's a lack of a system. Micah said that when you have rules in place, it's not saying that there can never be an exception, but the exception cannot be the rule. That's where advisors fall into a trap. And the guys run into advisors all the time who will claim that they never do a particular thing. But in reality, they end up realizing that they've just been lying to themselves, unintentionally, of course. And that's where the guy said, you have to call yourself out and others on things. Matt shared that having systems in place actually allows you to have more options in place. It doesn't create more of a limit on those. So by having defined processes, you're actually able to make certain exceptions in the rare instance that it's needed. The guys recapped for our new and returning listeners how meetings work in both their offices, which is that they run a surge schedule where they have designated days and times that they're meeting with clients and prospects. So they're meeting with people on their timeline, not just because someone else requested. They shared that you also have to have a system in place for your team to be efficient to where they can't go outside of that system and break the process. The guys then talked about the exception that happened for Micah. One was having a 3-hour appointment and the other was having a house call. Now, his meetings are usually an hour, and he said he doesn't even remember how long it's been since he made a house call. So for the 3-hour meeting, he said this was done for a client who was moving back to Alaska. The client said he wanted to review his estate planning, so Micah decided to bring the attorney in to go through that, which then made it a 2-hour meeting. Then Micah found out that this client came to Alaska for the sole purpose of meeting with him. So he also ended up socializing with the client afterward. So in total, it was 3 hours with this client, which Micah would never recommend to another advisor. The guy said that advisors get into trouble here because the topic might go long, and then they think the meeting needs to last longer. So while in Micah's situation, it was 3 separate blocks of meetings, this isn't a situation that's sustainable because if you do this with all your clients, you'd run out of time for them. Matt and Micah welcomed pushback on why they felt this 3-hour meeting was okay in this situation. So, TPR listeners, we'd love to hear your feedback on our social media channels or by emailing us at lifestyle@perfectria.com. But they did mention the 5 exceptions per 100 clients that they abide by. So while this fell under that exception, because the client only wants to do this every few years, Micah said it's imperative that they know that this isn't a recurring thing every quarter. Matt and Micah cautioned when you're starting to make these exceptions because things can definitely start to trickle throughout if you're not careful. So those exceptions need to be very far and few between because when you make exceptions, they tend to be followed by more exceptions. The second situation that occurred with Micah had to do with a client who was now in hospice. He was made aware about this on a Friday and he wasn't working, but it was something that was weighing on him. So he reached out to the wife and one of the things he thought about is how can he make her life easier? So he and the team took care of sending food over to them to really help the wife as the caregiver in this situation. And it was a way to deliver value to this client. Micah said that you're dealing with heartbeats at the end of the day and you want to positively impact people, especially during difficult times in their lives. So in this situation, Micah also realized that their taxes hadn't been done because the CPA hadn't gotten the necessary forms to the client. Micah stepped in to help by visiting the wife in person to get the form signed, review the tax return, and send everything back. The client was so grateful to Micah for helping to take this one task off of her plate. They also went back through her estate planning documents just to make sure that everything was in order. He said there's times like this that you just need to roll out the red carpet and make sure the heartbeats are taken care of. Matt pointed out that it was because of the systems that are in place that Micah specifically has in place that allowed him to take these exceptions and help the client during this time. Let's get into action items. Does your office have an end-of-life checklist? And what are the high touches that you can do with your clients? And also consider the technical things that you need to do and make sure that you're checking everything, especially with estate planning documents. Take the estate planning masterclass, even if you're already doing this for your clients. There's always an opportunity to improve. And if you don't have the bandwidth on your team, look to bring on a virtual assistant and give them specific tasks to review and check. So reach out to our friends at Belay by texting RIA to 55123. Lastly, visit theperfectria.com/quiz to analyze your practice and see where you can most improve. On Wednesday, Matt was joined by advisor Nic Yoemans from Yoemans Consulting Group in Marietta. They wanted to talk about the difference that they see between those advisors who may have been in practice for years and are still mediocre versus those who are newer and are already successful in what they're doing. Nic said a lot of it has to do with mindset and intentionality. It's easy for people to get locked into habits and you're doing something only because you feel you have to do something or because that's just the way it is. But if you're not willing to challenge the status quo, then you're just going to continue to be that status quo. One of the things he said helped in his firm was getting a coach and having many coaches over his career. He said that if he really wants to do better, then he needs someone who's helped other people get to a certain point. And he said that hiring that coach is a critical factor to helping some of those advisors break through those barriers. So for wherever you're stuck, Matt and Nic said that you need to consider who is going to coach you to that next level and who you're surrounding yourself with. Are you being challenged? And if not, maybe you need to look for a new circle and raise your gaze. Nic shared how he got into the industry and the family business, which he's partners in with his father, Randy. Now, if you haven't listened to his story, please go back and listen to Wednesday's episode because his first official title is definitely a first. But to summarize, Nic was given a job at his dad's firm to manage the bathrooms. One of the things Nic mentioned, along with having a coach, is actually being coachable, because if you want to be the best, then you need to listen to the best. So for newer advisors, to level up, you need to be coachable and make sure that you're reading and finding out what the people you like are reading, because that exchange of ideas is so powerful. Matt and Nic then talked about some of their favorite books, and Nic shared that the more he reads, the more he learned that there's so much he doesn't know. So he feels like a sponge, but he's always looking for things that challenge him. He said because it'll either firm up his convictions or it'll challenge the way he believes and change the way that he's doing certain things. Nic also shared how he's done team training on books that he's reading. In his practice, they call it wisdom, wealth, and wellness. The wisdom is how can they pour that into the team's development, because the better the team makes themselves, the better they're going to be with the firm. Then wealth, how can they help the team set themselves up for success? And then wellness, making sure the team is taking care of themselves health-wise. They tie this into quarterly meetings where they break down a book and then do a team activity. He said he wants to be vested in his team and his team vested in him, because that creates that excellent relationship where the team believes in your vision. Matt and Nic wrapped up by looking at whether you're doing the maximum versus the minimum. Nic said he's solving for what the next thing is to get even better, and that this comes down to being intentional. He said he can be growth-minded and have a lifestyle practice, and that it's not about how much time he's taking off. It's about how intentional he is when he's on and in the office. Let's get into action items. Look at your circle and see whether it provides a level of accountability to get you where you want to go. And if you haven't defined where you want to go, then make that your first step. Figure out what it is that you want and get a coach to help you get to where you want. Jamie was ruffling some feathers on Thursday as she was talking about owning your identity. Now, this wasn't a political episode, but it focused on a story and experience that Jamie and her family went through. Jamie said, there's a part of us that's always wondering where we fit in this world. The words she shared from her relative who was going through a difficult time, as was their child, were that he wanted them to be happy and to own who they are and to never apologize to someone for who they are. Jamie said there are so many people who don't own who they are, people who might be struggling with where they came from versus where they want to go in life. Same with the people in your life. They may want you to be successful, but maybe they don't actually want you to succeed. They'd rather you stay right where you are and not necessarily own who you're becoming. So this might be colleagues or family members who might be happier if you had a little bit of failure, or who say maybe you've forgotten where you came from. Jamie said, instead of having forgotten where you came from, are you committed to the destination? As you've heard before, she shared you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most amount of time with. But you might be focused on all the things that are holding you back instead of what will propel you forward. She said to think about how many times you write down the same goals, but you just don't take action to achieve it, and you don't surround yourself with people who are achieving greatness. How many times has someone told you that you aren't good enough, and how many times did you believe them? Jamie said the people who wake up feeling entitled and blaming everyone else are miserable, and they aren't owning who they are. So if you haven't risen above your circumstances, it's your own fault, because everyone goes through trials and tribulations. You have a choice to own who you want to become. that there are things that can derail you and things can happen, but you don't have to stay stuck. Jamie said, you have to take deliberate action to live your own destiny, but you need to ask yourself if you're ready to take action. She said sometimes people are embarrassed when they're writing down their goals if someone else sees them, but to own what it is that you want and step into that. Stop being ashamed of wanting things. She said, if you want to be the best there is, then own that and find other people who are where you want to be and ask how they got there. That there's people out there that are willing and want to help you and want to share, because those are also the people who own who they are and their successes. Let's get into action items. Think about who you are, write it down, and then own it. Take a long, hard look at the people you're surrounded by and who's pushing you to be your best. And if you don't have that group, then you need to find them. T-Power Nation, one more thing. Be sure to sign up for our next Nation Power Session on October 18th, as Matt and Micah will talk about where business planning fails. The session is open to anyone, so save your spot by visiting theperfectria.com/power session. That wraps up this week's recap. Thank you for joining me, and please share this or any of our episodes with another advisor or a team member who you think might benefit from listening. And until next time, happy planning.